today's top boxing news.
Ow! Okay, we'll start with this. A tweet by way of the Boxing Waffle that states, Ben Shalom stated that he had offered WBA and IBO world champion Henna Rankin 6 figures to unify with WBO world champion Natasha Jonas. This proposed offer was to be on the undercard of Shields versus Marshall. However, it is apparent that Rankin is taking the Terry Harper route.
I was talking about this just the other day.
What looks to be confirmation. I was right to assume that Ben Shalom and the people over there at Sky and Boxer, they were attempting to orchestrate Jonas versus Rankin to take place on the undercard of Shields versus Marshall. They wanted to doll it up. And that would have been a nice addition to the card, but as stated, it's looking more and more like Hannah's going the Terry Harper route as opposed to the Natasha Jonas route. Does that mean that Natasha Jonas is out of options? Does that mean that she's up the creek without a paddle? No, not necessarily. They can still get her another fight before this year is out.
It's not like she's frozen out of the division or anything like that.
In terms of credible opponents, challengers, and even champions, there are 2 other champions that Natasha Jonas can seek out in order to unify titles, either next or after next. We know that Cecilia Brækhus was supposed to be challenging WBC champion of Sweden, Patricia Bergult, for her title on the undercard of Oscar Rivas versus Lukas Rosansky, but that fight had experienced logistical issues.
That card.
And now it's been postponed. The people over there at Boxer, Sky, they can approach Patricia Bergult and offer her what they were willing to offer Henna Rankin. They can also approach Marie-Eve Dicaire of Canada, this division's reigning IBF champion. They can
approach her and offer her what they were offering Henna Rankin.
They can do that, or they can see the situation through. Wait it out. They can so decide to keep Natasha Jonas busy with the likes of Lolita Musea, who was in action earlier this year in March. You might be familiar with that name, Lolita Musea. That's who Savannah Marshall knocked out last year.
Up there at middleweight in defense of her WBO title.
Lolita Musea is now campaigning as a junior middleweight, and she has gotten herself back in the winner's bracket this past March. Lolita Musea is a decent keep busy fight for Natasha Jonas.
So is former champion Femke Hermans.
Bear in mind, we're talking about a situation to where the goal is to get Natasha Jonas another fight before the year is out. Perhaps not a unification match, perhaps not a high-profile fight, but a keep-busy fight.
And they can keep Natasha Jonas busy for the remainder of the year with Lolita Musea.
Seasoned veteran Chevelle Hallback, Hannah Hansen of Germany, who was very recently in action. Mexico's own Cynthia Lozano, America's own Logan Haller.
Today's junior middleweight division is a more densely populated division than it was in previous years, in previous eras. There are more fighters there to choose from.
And more champions. The goal here is to get Natasha Jonas back out there for what remains of 2022, as to not allow her buzz to dissipate and not allow her to collect ring rust, because Natasha Jonas, capable and experienced fighter that she might be, she's not getting any younger.
You want to use whatever time you do have to stay sharp,
so that when a big fight, big opportunity does come around, you're ready for it. Even if, by some chance, the people at Sky Sports and Boxer can't make a unification match happen for Natasha for what remains of this year, even if that's not a viable route per se, there are other options out there to keep her busy so that perhaps early next year they can schedule a unification match. She's not limited to chasing down Henna Rankin for a unification fight. There are 2 other champions at this weight.
And a host of up-and-comers like France's own Priscilla Preterle.
Experienced fighters like America's own Sonia Dreeling.
While Natasha Jonas waits for some of the murkiness to dissipate in that world title picture.
Waiting out the outcome of Rankin versus Harper. Waiting out the ongoing situation involving the WBC title between Patricia Bergult and Cecilia Brækhus. And waiting to see what it is Marie-Eve Dicaire is about to do, this division's IBF champion. There are a number of good fights that can be made for Natasha Jonas, winnable fights, keep busy fights, to keep her sharp in the mean in between time. So I hope that we do get to see Natasha at least one more time.
It'd be a terrible waste of time if we didn't.
In men's heavyweight news, the rumor mill is spinning per a tweet from International Boxing News. Joyce versus Joseph Parker have now agreed to a heavyweight clash on September 24 live at the AO Arena in Manchester. A press conference is scheduled for next Wednesday. Undercard to be announced shortly.
Wow.
I don't think any of us were expecting to hear this, because not but a few weeks ago, this fight fell apart and news broke that Joseph Parker had inked a deal with the people over there at Sky Sports and Boxer, the rival platform, platform to Queensberry Promotions and BT. It seemed like this fight was dead in the water. So it is a welcome bit of news. This is one of the better fights you can hope to put on in today's heavyweight division that seems to be at more or less a standstill as we all wait for the outcome of Joshua versus Usyk 2 to be decided. We wait to see what it is Tyson Fury, who's supposed to be retired.
What's he gonna do next?
And all the potential opponent options he's been playing with, Francis Ngannou and Thor Bjornsson, perhaps a Derek Chisora trilogy.
The world title picture, for the most part, most of this year has been frozen.
Which wouldn't be so bad if these other fighters were fighting. Fighters like Joe Joyce, fighters like former champion Joseph Parker. And for Joe Joyce, that's what he needs right now as he inches closer to that world title shot, that world title picture.
Yeah.
Ideally, he should be fighting former champions right now, and that's what Joseph Parker is. Initially, it seemed like Joseph Parker didn't want any parts of this guy.
Joe Boxer Parker's been pissing a lot of people off.
He has. Walking away from an IBF-mandated fight against unbeaten up-and-comer Filip Hrgovic, then subsequently walking away from this fight with Joe Joyce, all can be forgiven if this fight gets over the line.
Yeah, you can't accuse Joe Boxer Parker of ducking unbeaten up-and-comers if he actually ends up fighting one, but he has to fight one.
Because he's not currently the mandatory challenger by way of any of the alphabet organizations. To get to that point, he's got to beat the likes of a Filip Hrgovic or a Joe Joyce, who he's set to face, based on these rumors, very soon, in September. And it's an intriguing matchup, it really is, because Joseph Parker, not only is he a more experienced professional boxer than Joe Joyce is, but he's also a former champion and younger than Joe Joyce. Experience really is on Joseph Parker's side. What isn't?
And time is on his side because he is some years older than Joe Joyce.
Joseph Parker has the edge in all those departments, though what he's lacking is killer instinct. We saw in his last fight with Derek Chisora that he came very close to stopping the veteran fighter, the seasoned guy, and he more or less let him off the hook after visibly hurting Derek Chisora several times off of hard uppercuts that landed, making the necessary adjustments to win the second fight more emphatically than he did the first.
He could have stopped Derek Chisora, but he didn't.
Joseph Parker has been a bit of an enigma because you see a physically capable fighter with a granite chin. He can take a hard shot, and he's got some power, some speed in those hands mid-range to inside, and he seems to have a higher ceiling than Joe Joyce, a limited, albeit very durable and hard-punching guy.
Joe Joyce has a great gas tank, too.
What makes the fight such an intriguing fight is Joseph Parker is more experienced than Joe Joyce, a former champion, and younger than Joe Joyce. He even seems a more malleable, versatile fighter, but he's lacking dog. He's lacking killer instinct. And that's the one area where Joe Joyce has him beat.
Well, that and Joe's noticeably bigger than Joe.
Which Joe?
G.I. Joe?
Billy Joe Saunders. Joe Joyce does have a noticeable height advantage. I think he also has a reach advantage over Joseph Parker. Joseph Parker's sweet spot is mid-range to inside, but it could be difficult getting there as Joe Joyce will likely be coming forward as well, unloading a barrage of punches, testing that chin, testing
Joseph Parker's punch resistance.
Joseph Parker, who upon initially walking away from this fight stated that the reason he did that was Frank Warren had changed certain elements of the initial agreement, the initial contract, and that's what coaxed him to go over there at Sky Sports Boxer, see what they were talking about. But they must not have been speaking his language if he is now revisiting this fight with Joe Joyce. And I must admit that this fight with Joe Joyce is bigger and better than anything Sky Sports can offer up.
Right now it is. The most they can do is put him back in there with Huey Fury for a rematch nobody's asking for.
Perhaps schedule a Michael Hunter fight, which I will admit would be an intriguing fight, though this fight is an even more intriguing fight than that fight is. Right now, I like a Joe Joyce fight more than any other fight that Joseph could have on the Sky Sports and Boxer side of things.
This is a welcome bit of news. I'm glad he's decided to revisit this fight.
Facing an unbeaten up-and-comer won't be the first time we've seen that in recent memory when it comes to Joe Boxer Parker. Don't forget, he dished out Junior Fa his first professional loss, and it wasn't that long ago. This is different, though. This is an unbeaten up-and-comer like Junior Fa was an unbeaten up-and-comer, but this is a former Olympian.
A guy who actually medaled.
A guy with a higher ceiling and a guy with more durability than little old Junior near far.
The opportunity to make a statement is there for both combatants, for both fighters.
What if Joe Joyce ends up being the first guy that stops Joseph Parker, former WBO heavyweight champion Joseph Parker? And what if the same is true in reverse? What if Joseph Parker not only dishes Joe Joyce out, his first professional loss, but what if he stops him? You must admit that Joseph Parker is a better caliber of fighter than anybody that Joe Joyce has fought so far. So the intrigue, the sizzle, as it were, it's there.
Old Fish Eyes Frank Warren, he's got a nice little fight on his hands, is what he's got.
And finally, men's light heavyweight, another unexpected bit of news. Dimitri Bivol versus Joshua Buatsi set for Abu Dhabi. Eddie Hearn responds to speculation.
Wait, so Eddie's still trying to do this fight?
Eddie Hearn has responded to speculation that talks have started for Dimitri Bivol to face Joshua Buatsi. A source has told Boxing Social that the WBA light heavyweight champion could be set to defend his title in Abu Dhabi against the Brit this year. We reached out to Buatsi's promoter for a comment on the matter, and Eddie Hearn replied, "Nothing agreed or close." Last month, Eddie Hearn revealed that an offer had been put to Buatsi for the fight, but hope seems to have been dashed when the WBA had ordered Bivol to face mandatory challenger Gilberto Ramirez. Communication on the matter had been sent to both teams, and they had until August 10th to successfully negotiate the fight. Should that not be achieved, then purse bids would be called.
The IBF very recently ordered Jean Pascal to take on Joshua Buatsi in what would be an IBF final eliminator.
And up until recently, I thought, given that the WBA has already ordered Bivol versus Ramirez, I thought that would be the direction that Joshua Buatsi is taken in.
I thought they'd take him in the direction of a Jean Pascal fight. Apparently not.
The article continued, Bivol's champion period is conditioned to a term of 24 months, and his last mandatory fight was in March 3rd of 2018. His next one was to be after March 2020. For that reason, he must face Ramirez.
And I gotta be honest with you, I got no problem with either fight, but I do like the Ramirez fight a little more than I like the Buatsi fight.
I think Ramirez versus Bivol is a better and more intriguing fight and a better stylistic clash, a better stylistic matchup that will yield a more fan-friendly aesthetic once both fighters are in the ring.
But apparently Eddie's still trying to make the Bivol versus Buatsi fight.
Eddie Hearn said, in all those situations, we would have a right to request an alternative fight, an exemption, which we will file with the WBA. No problem making the Zurdo Ramirez fight, but we had already made plans for the Joshua Buatsi fight in October, so we'll speak to the WBA.
Why is Eddie Hearn so hell-bent on putting Joshua Buatsi in a fight that a lot of people don't think he's ready for?
It's a legitimate question that has been asked ever since news broke that Eddie Hearn was moving to do this fight between Dimitri Bivol and Joshua Buatsi, and I can only tell you what I told you before. I think he wants to keep Dimitri Bivol busy, so busy that he's not available to fight Canelo for a second time.
And we'll get into that.
Over a week ago, the IBF ordered Joshua Buatsi to face former champion Jean Pascal in a world title eliminator. In their current rankings, Buatsi is the highest ranked contender at number 3. The 2016 Olympic bronze medalist has already stated that Bivol is the fight that he wants next, while Ramirez is mandatory challenger. The British light heavyweight sits one spot below at number 2.
Will the WBA give Dimitri an exemption to the mandatory?
So that he can fight Joshua Buatsi as a voluntary. Well, let's say that they do. Let's say that they allow him that wiggle room and he fights Joshua Buatsi. I think he beats Joshua Buatsi.
And if he beats Joshua Buatsi, he's not available to fight Canelo for a second time because he'll have to fight
Zurdo Ramirez, who is promoted by Golden Boy Promotions. Ramirez's promoter, Oscar De La Hoya, told TV Boxeo he is working with Bivol's manager, Vadim Kornilov, on making the fight, not Hearn. Eddie Hearn is not Bivol's promoter. I am working with Bivol's manager. That fight is going to be negotiated. It is going to be done. Buatsi was last in action, defeating domestic rival Craig Richards, while Bivol produced one of the results of the year, defeating Canelo Alvarez.
It's an immaterial and fluid situation.
We don't know that the WBA is going to give Dimitri Bivol an exemption to the mandatory, and if he doesn't, he has to fight Zurdo. If he does, he fights Buatsi, likely outpoints him, likely beats him, and then he's got to go straight into a Zurdo Ramirez mandated title fight, at which point he won't be available to have a rematch with Canelo Alvarez.
Like I said, maybe Canelo Alvarez wants to run it back with Dimitri. Maybe his pride as a fighter.
Yeah, maybe he wants to run it back, and maybe he wants to put things right, but I don't think that's what Eddie Hearn wants. Why else would he be so adamant that Dimitri Bivol voluntarily defend his title against Joshua Buatsi? He knows if he fights Buatsi and he beats Buatsi, he's not free to fight Canelo for a second time. He'll have to fight Zerto, or the title is forfeit.
And I don't think Dimitri Bivol's about to vacate his title and give it to Zerto Ramirez.
Not without a fight. I've expressed this sentiment before and received some questions in reference to it. Some people might ask, well, if he doesn't want Canelo to fight Dimitri for a second time, what does he intend for Canelo Alvarez to do beyond the Gennady Golovkin fight? And I don't know. Any choice, almost any choice, is a safer choice for Canelo than boxing Dimitri for a second time. Demetrius Andrade ain't doing nothing right now. He's got that whole situation at middleweight with Yanibek. A lot of people think he's going to vacate that title.
Irrespective of fighting Canelo Alvarez, a lot of people think he's going to chuck that title and go someplace else.
So what if Eddie Hearn gets that guy on the phone? Gets him in a Canelo Alvarez fight? Fighting Demetrius Andrade compared to fighting Dimitri Bivol is a more winnable situation. It's a more winnable fight than returning to light heavyweight to take that guy on for the second time.
A Charlo fight, a Benavidez fight.
You might be thinking to yourself, hey, wait a minute. Jermall Charlo, David Benavidez, those are PBC fighters. Those are PBC guys. Why would Eddie prefer that Canelo fight one of them? Well, Canelo Alvarez has all the leverage over them. Canelo Alvarez still is the A side to all these fighters at or around 168 pounds. And what Eddie Hearn can move to do is offer those guys the fight so long as it happens on the DAZN platform. And if they don't like it,
well, go fuck yourself and go fight in fights that nobody gives a fuck about like you've been doing.
The fuck are they putting in your Flintstone chewables that you think you can tell the cash cow of boxing where he has to fight you? Who the fuck are you?
What are you telling me? That if Eddie Hearn and Matchroom offer you a Canelo Alvarez fight on DAZN, you're not gonna take it? You're not gonna take it unless it happens on Showtime.
If you fuck this up, what the fuck can Showtime offer you? What can they offer you in place of a Canelo Alvarez fight? Because if you fuck this up, they gotta compensate you with something.
They've got to offer you something of comparable value to what you're missing out fighting Canelo on DAZN.
We may be getting ahead of ourselves because we don't even know that the WBA will give Dimitri Bivol an exemption to the mandatory. But looking at this, I just get the sense that Eddie Hearn wants to keep Dimitri so busy, he's not available to fight Canelo for a second time.